the biggest thing, the biggest obstacle that you face that you're going to have to get over is yourself and your self-doubt and your imposter syndrome. And like, if you don't believe that you can learn, if you have a fixed mindset, if you are like really doubting your skills and abilities, your job searching is a competition. It is sales. Like, you have to sell yourself. And if you don't believe in yourself, like, you're not going to like do well in this process. So it's really, really hard to get people to like, I don't know, adopt a growth mindset and believe in themselves, especially when you've been in this like very, very critical, like borderline toxic environment for so long, where your work is just criticized over and over and over again, and you never feel like what you do is good enough.
Before we get into today's show, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we have going on over here at Succession. So Succession is a life science sales membership that includes on-demand courses to up-level your sales skills, resources to plan and execute your sales process, a community for peer-to-peer networking and learning, and live workshops delivered by experts twice a month. You can get access to all of this as an individual for just $79 a month, or you can up-level your entire sales team with courses and customized learning designed for each individual rep. Come and join us over at succession.bio. Okay, let's dive back into the show. All right, we got another great episode for you here today. This one is a little bit different. We're actually joined by Ashley Ruba, who is the CEO of After Academia. She just started this brand new program to help academics, specifically PhDs, sort of find their career and find a new career path. And she was really awesome to talk to. She talked to us all about, the different program that she's got, how to overcome imposter syndrome, the stigma of sales, how to stand out in the job search, and, basically talking about her writing and how writing has been a really big part of building her brand on LinkedIn, making sure that she gets her thoughts across in the best way, and even, selling in her case for selling her new program. So what did you think, Nick?
Yeah, this was really fun. I really enjoyed the conversation. Similar things to you, too. The imposter syndrome piece was really interesting for me, having worked with lots of really smart people that still think they can't do things that they clearly can. So hearing her background in that was interesting. And also how a big pet passion of mine is the psychology of sales. And when she starts talking about that piece, that was really great too.
Totally agree. Awesome. Well, what do I always say that you always say that I should say?
Let's dive right in.
Hey, Ashley, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you here.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So we gave you a warning ahead of time, which is we got to hear a crazy or funny story that's happened in your career.
Yeah, I guess the story I have is maybe a bit crazy and funny. So when I was a PhD student, or, PhD students aren't paid much. So I was like, what other side jobs can I have? So I ended up doing yoga teacher training, which was a choice to do like a 200-hour training in the third year of my PhD program. So that was a little bit crazy. And then afterwards, for 2 years, I taught yoga at a cat cafe on Saturday mornings. So if you can imagine what teaching yoga in a room full of cats is like, that was also pretty funny. And yeah, but I made extra money to get through my last couple of years of my PhD program. So you do what we have to do.
That's amazing. I have 2 cats, so I
Yeah.
can 100% imagine what it is like to do yoga with cats running around.
I also have 2 cats, and they love doing yoga. Like, the mats come out and they are immediately on them. So
Yeah.
also no.
I'm now more excited about the side hustle things, because if you've heard many of the other podcasts, we had lots of different people on, and the ones that seem to be doing well in, let's say, customer facing roles have all had some kind of outward
facing side hustle.
Yeah,
Yes.
outward facing side hustle.
Some sort of side hustle.
And I'm keeping a list of these people to see what kind of event I can get together. And so far, we've got a huge list of people, and now we've just added yoga to our festival, basically.
Well, you've got
DJs.
we've got cocktail bars, we've got yoga, cat yoga studio, right? Like, I think we've got a few others.
We've got a Glastonbury-esque festival coming up that we can do just for everyone's side hustles.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, speaking of side hustles, you actually have been, you have your own program that you've built, your own company, and now you've recently just made the full leap, going all in on it. Want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So what is the short version of this story? So the short version is, I got my PhD in developmental psychology 5 years ago now, and then after being in academia for a really long time wanting to be a professor, I ended up leaving and going and transitioning into a career in UX research. I was at Meta for a bit, and then I ended up working at a medical device company, and throughout this process, I had been posting about my career transition on social media, on Twitter and LinkedIn, and lots of other people started asking me for help, and so I helped people for free for a really long time, did lots of free meetings and resume reviews until got to a point where I hit, like, 50,000 followers, and I was like, I can't, like, meet with everyone for free anymore." I'm like, "I wonder if anyone would pay me to do the same thing," and they did, and so back 6 months ago now is when I formally started, like, charging for services and created a coaching program, and the demand was so high, so unexpectedly high that I ended up not being able to handle that alongside my full-time job. So I ended up leaving my full-time job about a month ago to do this content creation, coaching full-time, which is not what I thought I would be doing with my career, but here we are.
You enjoying it though so far?
Yeah, no, I running a business is not something I ever thought I never thought about. I don't have a business background. I don't have sales, marketing, like nothing. Like I said, I'm a developmental psychologist by training. I worked with babies for 10 years, so did not know anything about running a business, and it's given me a lot, almost everything that I really enjoyed about academia and having my own research program. I do feel similar to how a professor feels in that I am essentially like running a small business, like running a startup, like having to make all of these decisions. So it's a lot of autonomy and creativity. And yeah, I get to help people at the end of the day, which is why I left academia in the first place. I just wanted to have a more immediate impact on other people in my work.
That's amazing. And I'm sure you deal with a number of different, backgrounds and people that are, uh, maybe unsure of what they should be doing with their career, right? They're probably like in their PhD, they're like, I don't love this, but I don't know what to do next. Like, how's that, trying to work through that with people?
Yeah, I end up working with everyone, but the majority of folks who end up asking for my help are usually in social sciences, so psychology, anthropology, political science, humanities, education. I get some folks from life sciences, like biology, wanting to go into like R&D careers, and then I get the occasional like engineer, but most of the time, especially folks who are coming from social sciences and humanities, like what we studied in our PhD program in academia, we can't actually like study that
Mm.
in the real world. So like I studied infant emotional development for 10 years, so working with babies, and there's very few slash no places that I could do that outside of a university setting. So it's about figuring out like beyond the topic that you've studied that you're an expert in, like what are the things that you actually really like doing? What are the skills that you have? Writing, public speaking, research skills, data analytics skills, like all of these other
Mm.
skills are very, very marketable and they do transfer. But it's separating yourself out from your subject matter that which is like very, very hard for people. So I do a lot of asking people, like what do you actually like doing? What are you good at doing? And then trying to help them find a career that maximizes those things.
So something I've seen in building teams and managing people, and the smarter the person, I think, the more likely I am to see this. And I wondered to get your perspective on it is that if someone's really smart and studied a long time to be very good at something, they tend to self-reject a lot from areas where they don't have 100% of the skills. Whereas they don't realize that if you have 100% of the skills, you shouldn't be applying for that job. You're already too qualified, right? Do you see that across industries and with smart people too?
Yeah, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. I mean, I'm someone who experiences a lot of imposter syndrome still, especially like running a business and like being in the coaching space. I'm like I said, I have no background in business. I'm having to learn everything now on my own. It's hard, like for sure. And I think the biggest thing that I tell people whenever I work with them, it's like the biggest thing, the biggest obstacle that you face that you're gonna have to get over is yourself and your self-doubt and your imposter syndrome, and, like, if you don't believe that you can learn, if you have a fixed mindset, if you are, like, really doubting your skills and abilities, your job searching is a competition, it is sales, like, you have to sell yourself, and if you don't believe in yourself, like, you're not going to, like, do well in this process, so that's a big it's really, really hard to get people to, like, I don't know, adopt a growth mindset and believe in themselves, especially when you've been in this, like, very some very critical, like borderline toxic environment for so long where your work is just criticized over and over and over again and you never feel like what you do is good enough.
Yeah, I think that the biggest tip I'd say for that is people around me that know me in my recent career probably think that I would never have imposter syndrome because I'm very overconfident. But I would say I used to have it a lot more than I would now. And it was when I started applying for stuff that I thought I shouldn't. And then you'd be like, oh, hold on, I got accepted for that. Or hold on, I got that promotion. The more you see that, the more you put yourself out there, the less you let that imposter syndrome control you. And I think so for anyone who follows you and listening, I think you just got to go out and try, right? Let someone else reject you, go reject yourself.
Yeah, and I think sometimes imposter syndrome is like it's not invalid, it's just you're just feeling very humble with like I actually don't really know what I'm doing, and I felt this way, my I after I quit a postdoctoral fellowship that I had, and then 3 months later I got a job at Meta, and I remember like getting this job and feeling like I am not qualified to be here. Like I just started in this field, like I don't know what I'm doing, and working at Meta, they describe it as drinking from a fire hose, at least for like your first 6 months, because there's so much going on. And I definitely felt that. And then it got easier. And then I changed careers again and ended up working at a medical device company. And I have no background in medical devices at all or orthopedic surgery, like anything. And it was, I remember like the first month feeling very overwhelmed of like, I think they're going to fire me because I don't belong here. But again, I learned very quickly and like figured it out pretty fast and like leveraged my other transferable skills like writing and again teaching myself and learning. But yeah, initially I think the imposter syndrome was more just humility of like I actually don't know anything and I have a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, I mean, when I first made the transition, I was just sold in software for a long time, sold to like IT and marketing, very different than being
Mhm.
in biotech. And when I joined Synthego at the beginning, I also had the similar like only thing I knew was the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? Like that's my biology background, and so I was just like, what am I? How's anybody going to listen to me? How's anybody going to take anything I say seriously? And so I think I did similar to you. It's like, what are you good at? Well, I'm good at like learning stuff and figuring things out. So
Mhm.
I went and took a bunch of courses and just soaked up as much information as I could, and then eventually was able to kind of overcome that imposter syndrome.
Yeah, it's something that it gets easier and it gets better, but it definitely like if you give into it too much, kind of like what you're saying, Nick, you just kind of get stuck and you don't actually like seek out opportunities that would challenge you because you just self-select out.
Once you've got a certain amount of skills of drinking from the fire hose, that is actually a skill in itself. Being able to
Mhm.
pick out the information I need to know now and the stuff I can learn afterwards. So where are my building blocks and where is the supplementary stuff? And that becomes a skill in itself. And the more you do that, the better you get at it and the more easy you can take on new roles, I think. And I think that's a key skill you have to learn because every time I go into a job, I've been in sciences for years, but each time it's in depth in a specific area. You can't be an expert in every area.
Yeah, and I think that's very true, and even during a PhD program, like, there's so much literature to read, and, I mean, I've probably read, like, 2,000 papers at this point, and at some point, you just learn how to read very quickly, skim, like, get the information that you want and move on,
Yeah.
but I don't I have ADHD, so sometimes I get very lost in the details just because I find the details to be very interesting, so it is sometimes hard to zoom out and, like, just see the big picture.
Yeah, Nick is well aware of those of that as well. So very similar.
Whoa. Sorry.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, so now you're kind of overcoming your own kind of imposter syndrome, learning a bunch of whole new stuff, starting your own company, getting into business. And I know one of the things that you've recently gotten more excited about is actually sales.
This is true.
So I know back you mentioned, I should say, that you've had one really bad sales experiences, I'm sure. So that'd be great to hear some of those stories because those are always funny. But then this sort of like aversion to sales that exists, and people just like, especially in academia, it's just like, I will never go into sales. Sales is a dirty word. Don't say that around me. Um, but in reality, sales is just about helping people, right? It's about
Mhm.
identifying a problem and helping people solve that particular problem. So we'd love to hear kind of your experience having gone, through that shift.
Yeah, yeah, because like you said, in academia especially, and maybe this is the case more in certain areas, at least in my program, you were like industry, and particularly like in tech, when like lots of folks were going into UX research with a psych background, it was always framed as like, well, you're just doing research to like make Mark Zuckerberg richer. Like you're not actually doing research that's going to help anyone. You're just like creating profits for shareholders or CEOs. And that's how it was always framed. And so, of course, when you frame it that way, you view like, well, my basic science is like so much more, it's much more moral. And so I'm going to stay in this path.
Mhm.
But then I never imagined that I would be working at Meta and like doing it and be able to see the applications of, I was working on augmented reality and working in that, and then moving to a medical device company where I'm like, I'm actually building products that are helping surgeons treat their patients better. Like that was the whole mission of my company. And I like in viewing it that way, I was like, yeah, we have a whole sales team, but like the medical sales team is just trying to figure out like what surgeons need so we can be able to create products that help them. And so that is ultimately like the point of UX research. And also when I was creating my own company and continuing to essentially like do market research, do UX research, talking to PhDs and trying to figure out what are your problems? Like what can I create that will help you solve this problem that you have? I don't know, the process I found to be like it was very interesting. And then I realized that sales is just there's a lot of human psychology involved in sales. And like I said, my PhD's in psychology. And once I realized that, I found it was much more fascinating to go through like other people's sales funnels and be like, why is this working for me? And like, but why is this not working for me? And I don't know, it's so much more like interesting, complicated than just sales, like they're evil. Cause it's like you said, it's not. But I do get a lot of pitches as someone who I guess is CEO in their LinkedIn bio, and most of them are just very, very bad. It's just like your standard pitch of like, here's this product, like, do you want it? Without any kind of conversation first to develop any sort of rapport. But at this point, when people do have those conversations to develop rapport, I'm just like, I have a feeling like you're going to try to sell me
Yeah.
something, but I'm like less upset about it because at least this doesn't feel bad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty tough out there. That's for sure. It's like, do you and I both breathe? Do you want to buy my stuff? Right. It's like, that's the sort of connection they make. Yeah, it's rough, especially on LinkedIn with the whole connected pitch. It's like nowadays, if somebody connects with me and I see that they have a sales title or some sort of title,
Yeah.
I'm like, "Ah, I know they're just gonna pitch slap me, and like the next message is gonna be, buy the product or whatever. But yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
but you don't, and I guess the big picture or the grass is always greener on the other side version of this is that because everybody's doing that, it's not hard to stand out.
No, it's
Meaning,
not.
like, if you are human and you're doing something to add value to other people, you will stand out. And I heard something from somebody the other day, which was, um, talking about cold outreach. It's never cold if you're adding value.
Mhm.
I'm like, that's
Yeah.
good. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, someone emailed me the other day and was offering to write, like, I think free advertising copy for I don't do paid ads right now, but they were like, "I'm happy to, like, write this for you for free and, like, in exchange for a review," and it's like leading with that kind of value, I was like, "Oh, this is a very rare this is a very rare sales pitch." I think the one that worked I worked with someone to rebrand my business because started as a content creator, did not really have a strategy, and I was like, I would like to be more intentional about this, and ended up like messaging someone who I like kind of knew who was in branding, who's also a PhD, and we were just kind of I was like, "Hey, I think like I see this one person who's kind of copying my content. Like, what would you recommend?" And then he like started talking to me about it and was like, "Well, there's like other ways that you can stand out in the branding space." And as we started talking, I'm like, can I get on a sales call with you? Like, I feel like I'm about to get on one anyway, but this you're like genuinely trying to help me. And then later on he was like, I actually like wasn't trying to get you on a sales call. I was just generally trying to like give you advice. But at that point it was because it was so genuine. And I think that's why I found that to be like very effective because he actually wasn't trying to like get me on a call at all. Just trying to like be helpful as a friend.
I
Yeah.
think one of two things work. In both ways, you have to add value. You either have to be genuinely trying to do something without the ulterior motive of pitching people, or just be very upfront and not try to hide that you're pitching someone. If you're doing
Hmm.
somewhere between the two, I think it's quite transparent and we don't like it. It's like, I feel like I'm trying to be tricked. But if I'm like, hey, I know you probably get a load of sales pitches. I just want to let you know about the thing because I think it's important to you. And you sort of build around
Mhm.
that, then it's obvious and people can choose to ignore it or listen. Or genuinely care about something I've seen in your publication, etc. Then that's also genuine and they can tell.
Yeah, and I mean, and going back to what you were saying, Harrison, it's like cold outreach and the sales process. It's also very applicable to job seekers. It's actually
Mhm.
not that hard to stand out on the job market if you are genuinely like adding value, like putting yourself out there, not just messaging people like, "Hey, can you give me a referral? Hey, can you look at my resume? Hey, can you give me a job?" But instead, actually trying to build a relationship with someone, figuring out like can I be the solution to your business problem? Is this a good mutual fit, like, for me working at your company? It's most job seekers don't do this at all, and they just do, like, a lot of cold outreach that n almost never works.
Do you have a couple tips for people around that? Because yeah, I always recommend people to do cold outreach to try
Mhm.
and get those connections and do that. So I'm just kind of curious, like other avenues as well.
Yeah, I mean, it can I guess, like, cold outreach depends if you're, like, immediately, like, again, like, asking for someone, like, pitching someone on, like, "Hey,
Hmm.
hire me," versus I mean, you can, like, I never cold emailed people to, like, get a job, but I know that some people have done that in terms of, like, "Here are the skills that I could bring to your company." But again, it's
Hmm.
you're still framing it as not like, "Can you give me a job?" But, like, "Here's how I could add value to your business, how I could solve a problem." I think the hardest part is, people job seekers most of the time, they just submit hundreds of resumes to
Yeah.
online job apps, which is only effective like 10% of the time, and it's much more effective, and most jobs are filled via some sort of connection, so at least, like, warming up your leads, potentially, like, just having them know, like, who you are. My last job that I got, which again, I transitioned into medical devices having no experience. I had met the hiring manager on LinkedIn. He started following me because of my content, and we had a very brief conversation like 4 months before he approached me about an open role on his team, and at that point, he had already been, like, exposed to my content, like, through the months and, like, knew who I was, and then when I said I was looking for a job, then he told me that he had an open role on his team, and that's a much more effective way to cut the line than to just be, like, reaching out to people and asking for jobs.
Yeah, to your point earlier, it's like if you treat it like a sales process, what I would recommend to people is you make a list of your like top 20 companies that you
Mhm.
want to work for, whether they're hiring or not.
Mhm.
Find out who the head of sales is, director of sales, whatever
Mhm.
for your region, and then reach out to them proactively and be like, hey, by the way, here's a bit about my background. Here's why they get a great fit for your team. I know you're not hiring right now, but when you are, would love to be first on that list, right? Like, is
Mhm.
that kind of what you're getting at? Where it's like, how do you provide some sort of value? How do you sort of build these connections without like the hard pitch or?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's kind of I mean, I view networking more as I mean, I think people treat networking as this very transactional process of like, "Hey, give me a job," or like, "I'll give you a job." But it's just for me, it's more about making professional friends, and, like, when you're making a friend, you're not making a friend with, like, the expectation of something in return, you're just
Mhm.
genuinely interested in them, so, I talk to folks all the time who have different careers, and I'm, like, not interested in being in any of these careers, but I'm genuinely just interested in, like, what do you do for work? Like, what is your day to day? And when you approach it from that kind of a very, like, genuine interest rather than, like, expecting something in return, then it just feels a lot better in the long run.
When when we write a newsletter also, and one of the topics that we take, well, Harrison writes most of them, I'll be honest, but sometimes I jump in and write one. But one of the ones we did was networking aimlessly,
Mhm.
because and that was kind of the ethos behind it. Network for the sake of networking, building connection, learning about people, building rapport. Don't network to get to the point where you can pitch. And
Yeah.
then it's more enjoyable for me actually when
Mhm.
doing that because I'm getting the connection and there it's more enjoyable for them. But the opportunities come out from it eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, networking, it's an investment, it's a long-term process. I also see, like, most people on LinkedIn or when I tell people, like, "Oh, yeah, I create content on LinkedIn," they're like, "Oh, I think I have a LinkedIn, but I don't use it," because they're not, like, actively looking for a job, which is what most people do. And I'm just like, "No, you should be on LinkedIn now because, like, who knows if you're going to get laid off? Like, who knows if all of a sudden you're gonna need to find a new job and then you're just starting at like square one and you have no network and you haven't given anything and and then you're in this desperation stage of like, okay, now I'm trying to find a job, and it's a very different energy than if you're just networking before you actually need to ask someone for something.
If I could go back, I would have started posting on LinkedIn 5 years ago.
Oh,
Like,
same.
I cannot believe I just was gonna be I was the person who was like, "No, I'm not gonna do it." Yeah, it's cringy. And then we started, Succession. It's like, "Okay, now I have to do it," right? Because it's like, now this is gonna be how we're gonna grow. And, oh my god, the amount of opportunities, connections, jobs, I mean, this whole conversation here is from LinkedIn, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
this podcast exists from LinkedIn. Everything is like built off the back of what we have been putting on LinkedIn and like our network and connections. And man, if I could go back and do it, it would have been, I'd do it way over. I'd start way earlier. So for anybody out there, if you want to like, have people come to you and like look to you for your expertise that you have, like start posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I tell everyone to do that because I feel very similarly. I only started posting on LinkedIn because I was posting on Twitter for a while, and then when Elon Musk bought Twitter, it was because most academics are on Twitter, not LinkedIn. I was like, I guess I'm gonna go to LinkedIn. I think Twitter is gonna die, and then I just was cross post. I was just posting literally copy paste of my tweet threads onto LinkedIn, and I
Mhm.
had like 20,000 followers in a month, and I was just like, why
Wow.
haven't I been doing this for years? And I was just, like, filled with, like, so much regret of, like, I just again, yeah, I thought LinkedIn, and there are pockets of LinkedIn that are very cringy and annoying, but there's also pockets that are, like, very thoughtful and helpful as well.
Your content on LinkedIn, I think, is impressive. So, like,
Oh, thanks.
I think your copywriting and the way you write your post is really well done, and I'm curious how you learned that. Like, did you just do it from writing all the time? Like, how did that come to be?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was always into creative writing, so I wrote poetry for a while, so that was, like, my original foray into writing,
Right.
was taking, like, every creative writing class I could in undergrad, and then it was always something I really enjoyed, so went to scientific writing, obviously, like, did a lot of that, published a lot of papers, but I think what helped me was writing content on Twitter where you have to be very brief because you only have 280 characters per tweet, and so I a lot of, like, that cadence and that style of writing I had developed, like, from writing on Twitter because you're also trying with every tweet, you're like, "How do I get the person to read the next one?" As opposed to just,
Mhm.
like, clicking off, so I think that's, like, part of what's helped, but then I've also learned more about copywriting over the last, like, year. Selling on my social media posts is still, like, very, very weird and hard for me, but I try to do it more. I'm trying to find, like, the balance between being, like, very, very direct and being like, "Buy my thing," and instead being more subtle, but uh, that's, like, the short answer for, like, how I write, like, my posts now.
It's interesting because, like, I think in sales is, a lot of it is written, right? So a lot of people think it's, "Oh, you gotta be able to talk really well." Well, it's like,
Mhm,
sure, part of it, but I think a lot of sales is written in your outreach that you do, for prospecting, in the follow-up that you do, like how you could write a business case, whatever it is, right? So it's like writing is so important when it comes to
mhm.
sales. And if you're posting and writing on a regular basis, you're learning how to like catch people's attention with the hook and how to be concise with your wording and your messaging that you're putting on social media. And so it's like it's a very transferable skill now into sales. So it's not just like for your own personal brand, it's also like a skill that you're learning at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a skill, and I was also a writing tutor for 8 years, so that's also helped as well because 'cause I've been able to, like,
Perfect.
see other people's writing and see, like, from, like, a sentence level, like, why it's confusing and, like, why it doesn't make sense, and I'm a big fan of, like, being very brief. I actually just finished reading, this one, Smart Brevity. I don't know if you've
Oh, our
read
brevity.
this
No, I
book.
have not.
But yeah, it's written by the co-creators of Axios and Politico, and so they talk a lot about how to be, like, very brief if you're writing content online specifically, and everything from posts to emails because we're just inundated with content, and most of it does not need to be as, like, long and wordy as it is, but especially academics, I think, have a tendency to be very, very long-winded.
I mean, that's how we're taught to write. I mean, I
Mhm.
remember growing up, it was like, you have to write a 1,500 word essay. And it was
Yeah.
like you had these word limits that you had to hit arbitrarily. It's like, well, what if I could tell the story in, 3 paragraphs or something,
Mhm.
or 1 paragraph? Why do I need to write 1,500 words? And I remember doing all of the tricks in the book, right? Like putting an extra space between the words, like instead of 1.5 spacing, it's like 1.55, right? Like we did the
Oh,
margins,
yeah.
you bring them in, right? You do all this stuff to try and make it look like it's 1,500 words.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's I find it really annoying because the way that we were taught to write in high school most of the time does not really translate to research papers, and this is a lot of the work that I did when I was in grad school, worked as a tutor in the psychology writing center, so having, undergrads come in with their papers, and it's like 5 paragraphs, but they don't understand. I'm like, a paper can be it should be, like, much longer than 5 paragraphs, and it's just, like, teaching people how to like, reteaching how to write, and it's, like, very, very I don't know, it's like scientific writing is a completely different process than, like, creative and narrative writing, and yeah, I found going through that process with other people was, like, very helpful in terms of me, like, developing my own writing too.
Yeah, that's great.
Go full circle. We spoke about ADHD and being distracted briefly. You mentioned the book, and I was out that conversation because I've just ordered it. I just went off on my. I couldn't stay.
Yeah.
Classic, yes.
Don't go
And
further
then
with
he
that.
won't read it because he got his, satisfaction just from purchasing the book, right?
Definitely.
So he actually won't even read it. Yeah.
No, I
Uh,
need to put
Yeah.
little dividers with a chocolate between to keep me going.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, ADHD, I only got diagn I realized that I had ADHD, like, 7 months ago. I had no idea because I just, like, managed to find a career in academia that was, like worked with my interest-based attention system, and it wasn't until my last job when I had so many meetings, and I could not pay attention in my meetings. I couldn't pay attention when I had, like, very what I thought, like, kind of boring work assignments to do or, like, "What is wrong with me?" But yeah, it's hard, and that's why I think entrepreneurship, like, works a lot better for me, still with its struggles because I don't have any employees, so there's always so much to do, and prioritizing things can feel like a struggle.
do you find though that there's a satisfaction in like making a checklist and like being able to like knock them off the checklist? Because I know for me,
Right.
I don't, I don't know if I actually have ADHD, but I feel like sometimes I do. I haven't
Yeah.
actually been diagnosed, but I feel like for me, if I get like the satisfaction of like completing a bunch of different tasks, it's highly helpful.
Yeah, I have to-do lists.
There it is. There it is. Yeah, there you go.
This is my daily to-do list. I also have, like, Notion pages with, like, quarterly to-do lists, and so that does, like, help, like, having some structure. I think for me being so new at this and also in a niche that I think for the most part has not been monetized, like, very much slash at all with, like, a few exceptions. I'm not there's not really like a roadmap for doing what I'm doing, and so trying to figure out like, okay, with scaling, what makes sense to do first because I will get so excited about everything and try to do it all at once and then burn out. And so
Sounds about
I'm
right.
just like
Yes.
learning how to do, okay, I'm gonna do this one thing first, and then I'm gonna do this next thing, and then telling myself like, this is going to be like a decades process of doing this thing, hopefully. And trying to just be, like, patient and do, like, a little bit every day. But that's hard for me because 'cause I'm a achiever for sure.
Well, I think we are actually just coming up right here on time. But I know you mentioned you might be coming with a cohort coming
Mhm.
up for your new program. So we'd love to maybe hear a little bit more about that. Share with all of the listeners who maybe in the lab somewhere still doing their
Yeah.
PhD and trying to figure out what the right career progression is for them.
Yeah, so what I have right now is it's like a career incubator program. So it's currently 8 weeks and it walks you through every step in terms of how to decide what you'd like to do for a non-academic role, creating a LinkedIn profile, networking, resumes, interviewing, all of the things end to end. And I just my 4th cohort started. We are now on week 4, so we're, like, halfway through. And yeah, so I'll be opening a new cohort at some point in July, and last time I had 15 spots open and they sold in, like, a few days. So if you want
That's
to
exciting.
get yeah, which is blew my mind. I was just like, never thought that they would go that quickly. So if you want to hop on the wait list, that is on my website, which is ashleyruba.com. And that is will be the first place that I will be opening spots for folks.
Awesome. And we will put that link in the show notes here for everybody as well. Sweet.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Ashley. It's been a
Yeah.
pleasure to have you on the show. Love to hear about all the great things that you're doing to help out the community, because we know everybody needs help out there. So thank you so
Yes,
much.
they do. Yeah. Thanks for having me.